on Vav Amud Aleph 6a, second line on the first line. Hatzad Hashavah Shabahan.
Up the top?
Up at the top.
The top.
Last word on the line. Hatzad Hashavah Shabahan. So the Mishnah, we're going back to explain the very first Mishnah of the Masechta, the very first Mishnah in the Tractate. And the Mishnah had said that Hatzad Hashavah Shabahan, what all of these have in common is Shadarkan Lahazik. They normally will do damage, Ushmirosan Alecha, and when you and it is your responsibility to watch over them. And when they do damage, then the owner or the one who is responsible for the damage done, he is obligated to pay from the best of his property. Okay, so the Gemara notes that every time we have a Mishnah that says Hatzad Hashavah Shabahen, what all of these have in common, it's coming to include something that was not earlier stated. Okay? So asks the Gemara, what is the Tzad Hashavah Shabahen, the words Hatzad Hashavah Shabahen, what is that coming to include that was not already stated? Meaning it has to be something that aside from the original four that was stated. Okay? So in the Mishnah we stated Hashor, Vahabor, Hamave, Vahever. Right, and there has to be something that's coming to be included that was not one of those four. So la'asuye mai, what is it coming to include? Amar Abaye, la'asuye avno sakino umatzao shehinichan berosh hagag v'naflu beruach metzuya v'hiziku. So it's coming to include a case where he left something on his rooftop. So he left a stone, a knife, or a package on top of his roof. And they fell in a common wind, meaning that in a commonly found wind, meaning it was not an onus. It was not something that was an extenuating circumstance, something that was beyond his control. Rather, it was a normal wind, something he should have been watching out for. Okay, and yet he did not, so he's negligent. Okay, and they did damage. Says the Gemara, Hechidami. What do you mean they did damage? If they did damage on their way down, meaning they fell off the roof and they hit someone on the way down, okay, so that is an example of eish being fire, meaning when we talk about the hezek of fire, it doesn't have to be specifically fire. It means anything which is your responsibility, and it did damage while it's traveling, just like a fire, right? It was your responsibility to keep control over the fire, and you did not, and it did damage while it was traveling, because the fire travels. So too here, this should be the same thing. Maishna eish, the koach acher me'urabo, umamoncho shmiraso alacha. What do we have that distinguishes fire? Koach acher me'urabo. There's another force which is involved in it. Meaning, when you have a fire and your fire, when it's spread to someone else's field, how does that happen? That happens because of the wind. And a wind comes and it blows the fire and the fire spreads. Right? So it's something that you're responsible for, even though there's a second force that's involved with it aside from yourself. Nevertheless, it's your responsibility. So haninami koach acher me'ura behen umamon choshmiraso alacha. Here too, right? There's another force involved. There's the wind that blew it off the roof. So there's the wind and gravity that are involved in bringing it down. Nevertheless, it's your responsibility. Right? So that would already be included in fire. So I don't need a Mishnah to tell me to add that case in. That case is already included in the case of fire. Ve'ela basa denaichi. So rather, it must be referring to they fell into the Rishus Harabim. They fell into a public thoroughfare, okay? And then someone tripped over them, and someone fell because they tripped over this stone or this knife or this package. Says the Gemara, Ida afkirinu. If he was mafkir them, if he made them ownerless, he gave up his rights of ownership on them. So bein l'Rav, bein l'Shmuel, hainu bor. So that's an example of bor. Meaning, when we talk about a pit in a public thoroughfare, it doesn't have to be a pit dug into the ground. It means anything which is a stumbling block to someone else, right? So if you put a stone in the middle of the Rishus Harabim, in the middle of a public thoroughfare, that's also a bor, right? So it says the Gemara, this is a case of bor. Maishna bor sheken tchilas asiyoso lenezek umamoncho shmirason alacha. Just like a bor, its original creation was to do damage. meaning a bor from the onset is something which is liable to do damage. So to here, this stone or knife or package, right, from its onset into the Rishus Harabim, it's already designed to do damage, and it's yours, Ushmirasan Alecha. Haninami Tchilas Asiyasan Lenezek Umamoncha, and it's your property, Ushmirasan Alecha. Says the Gemara, Ella de Lo Afkirinu. So I must be talking about where he was not mafkirit, okay? And he still retains ownership over it. L'Shmuel the Amar Kula Miboro Lamadnu Hainu Bor. According to Shmuel, who says that all these halachos are learnt out from the case of bor, that applies even if he does retain ownership. Meaning the central case of bor in the Torah is where he does not have ownership over it. If I dig a pit in the public thoroughfare, I don't have ownership over that pit because it's not my property, right? But nevertheless, Shmuel says we expand this to include even something which is my property. So says Gemara, La'olam da'afkirinu. No, we're talking about where he was mafkirit. So lo damu lebor, but there is a distinction. Ma lebor shekain ein koach acher me'urabo. Tomer bahani shekoach acher me'urabohen. Right. So this is different than a bor. A bor, right? How does this pit get into the public thoroughfare? I dug it, right? I dug it, right? And there was no other force involved in the creation of this pit. Right? There's no wind that's involved in the creation of this pit. There's no other force involved. I did it myself, right? But in this case, right, I put this stone up on my roof. The wind was involved in blowing it down and putting it into Rishus Harabim, right? So I didn't do it by myself. I did it together with the wind. So perhaps there I would not be responsible as bor, because I was not the only force involved. There was another force involved in it. Okay? So says the Gemara, this case is not so simple. It's not automatically included in bor because there's another force involved with it. Okay. So says the Gemara, Eish tochiach. Okay, but for that we already know that I'm responsible for other forces from the case of fire. Says the Gemara, Mala eish ken darko lelech ulahazik. So no, fire is different because it normally we expect it to travel and to do damage. Okay? That's the nature of a fire. It's what it does. It travels and it does damage. Okay, but this case, the stone or the knife that's on the roof, it doesn't necessarily expect it to go and do damage. And it's not something that normally travels. It says the Gemara, bor tochiach. So bor will prove that that doesn't matter, that you're responsible even if it doesn't go to do damage. V'chazar adin. So essentially what we've done is we've gone in a big circle. Okay. So in case you're not seasick yet, okay. What we've done is we've gone in a big circle. And the Gemara uses a very interesting form of logic here, where the Gemara says that basically we say chazar adin. The din goes in a circle. Okay. The halacha goes in a circle. And we say lo ra'izeh ke ra'izeh. These are not identical to each other. Okay. But from the cumulative package of both of them, I can learn out the halacha for this case as well. Right? Meaning, if I know that I'm chayav for a bor, right, and I know that I'm chayav for eish, okay, then I can also learn out that I should be chayav for this package that I left on my roof and blew down into the Rishus Harabim, even though it's not identical to any one of these two, right? But it is encompassed in both of them. So from both bor and eish together, I can learn out that you'd be chayiv for this case as well, even though from either one on its own, I would not be able to learn out. I can learn out from the sort of the amalgamation of both of them. Okay. Right? Okay. So according to Abaye, that's what the Mishnah was coming to add. When the Mishnah said Atzara Shava Shabahen, what was it coming to add? It was coming to add this case of a stone that I left on my rooftop and then blew down and landed in the Rishus Harabim, and then somebody tripped over it, right? So that's the case that we're coming to add in. That even though I did not initially place it in the Rishus Harabim, it was the wind that blew it in, nevertheless, I'm still liable for it. Okay? Rava Amar, Rava says a little bit of a different case. La Asuye, it's coming to include Bor HaMiskalgel Beragle Adam of Beragle Behema. It's talking about a bor which is being kicked around by people in the Rishus Harabim. Okay. So what does that mean? I left a stone in the Rishus Harabim, okay, which already I'm in violation, right? Because I put a stone in the public thoroughfare, so already I created a bor. However, in the place where it was, nobody tripped over it. Nobody did any damage to it. What happened? A person or an animal kicked it, and it flew to, now it's in the center of the street, right?
Right.
And somebody's car went over it and broke their axle. Okay, so originally it was on the side and it wasn't doing any damage. Right now, somebody kicked it, it landed in the middle, right, and now it did damage. Okay, so that's the case that the Mishnah is telling me is included that you're liable for. Right, so I'm liable for it even though it got kicked by somebody else. Says the Gemara, Hechidam. What's the case? Ida afkirinu. If I was mafkirid, I'd have given up ownership of it. Bein l'Rav, bein l'Shmuel, hainu bor. Then whether according to Rav, whether according to Shmuel, that's a case of bor. Just as a bor, its original creation is to do damage, right? It has no place, it has no rightful place in a Rishus Harabim, right? So to this stone has no rightful place in Rishus Harabim, and it's my obligation to watch over it. Okay. Ella the lo afkirinu. So you'll tell me it's talking about a case where I was not mafkirid, I did not give up ownership. The Shmuel da Amar kula mibor lamadnu hainu bor. So according to Shmuel, who says that we learn out all these halachas from bor, this too would be included. Okay, so it says the Gemara laolam da afkirinu. No, we're talking about where I was mafkirid. Dami lebor. However, it's not immediately comparable to a bor. Why? Malabor shekin ma'asav garmulo. Says the Gemara that no, this is not identical to the case of bor that we discussed until now. Right? The case of bor that we discussed until now is where I dug a pit, right? And the pit in its exact location, because pits don't generally move, right? In the exact location where it was, that's where it did damage. Okay, so it's a direct consequence of my action, with no other force involved in it. So that's where I'm liable, right? But perhaps in this case, where I put the stone, it wasn't doing any damage, right? It's only because somebody else kicked it and now it's in the center of the street that it did damage. So how do you know that I'm liable for the fact that somebody else kicked it and put it in the center of the street? So that's not immediately apparent from the case of bor. So says the Gemara, you know how I'll know that? Shor yochiach. I'll learn it out from shor, right? If I own an ox, right? So my actions don't cause the ox to go and gore someone else or to step on something, right?
Right.
It's the animal chose to do it on its own. And nevertheless, who's responsible? I'm responsible. So you see that I'm responsible for something, even though it's not a direct consequence of my actions. If it's an evolvement of my actions, then I'm responsible for that as well. So says the Gemara, no, Malashosh can darko lele chulahazik, right? Says the Gemara, no, shor is different, right? Because shor is general. The nature of an animal is to walk around and do damage, right? That's in the nature of the animal, right? Whereas by bor, it's not in the nature of this stone to get up and walk to the middle of the street, right? It's only because somebody else came and kicked it. So it's not something that I would immediately have to take into account. Okay, says the Gemara, bor tochiach. Okay, but from that we learn out that I am responsible for a pit that I placed in the Rishus Harabim. So once again, what are we going to say? Chazar adin, lo ra'izeh ki ra'izeh. Okay, so here we're going to say as well, chazar adin, just like we said before, the din goes in a circle. Okay, meaning that from each one on its own, from bor by itself, I can't learn out. From shor by itself, I can't learn out. Right, but from the combination of the two, I can learn out that it would include a bor which is kicked by somebody else and ends up in the middle of the street and does damage. I can learn that that would be included based on the combination of bor and shor together. Okay. Okay. So now, so far we have two cases that are learned out from the extra words in the Mishnah. Okay, right? We have Abaye's case, which is the object that I placed on my roof and it blew down and landed in the Rishus Harabim and did damage. Somebody tripped over it. According to Rava, it's talking about a case where something I left in the Rishus Harabim, but it got kicked by somebody else and it ended up in the middle of the street and did damage there. Okay. Now Rav Ada bar Hava is going to come up with a third. Okay. Rav Ada bar Hava Amar La Suye is coming to include Hadatanya. This that we learned in the Brisa. Kol elu sha'amru poskin bivo sehen v'gorfen ma'or sehen bimos hachama B'mos hachama ein lahen rishus, b'mos hakshamim yesh lahen rishus. So there's a halacha that people would want to wash out their yards, okay, their front yards or their caves and enclosures that they have, and they want to clean them out. Okay, so they become filthy. So in the summer months, one is not permitted to do so. So how would you do it? You take a pressure washer, right, and you wash it out. Where's all the water going to go? It's going to drain into the street, right? Okay. So in the summer months, you're not permitted to do so. Why? Because the streets look nice and pretty, right? They're clean and nice. So if I'm going to take my my pressure washer and wash out my yard, and all the filth goes out into the street, right, I'm ruining the look of the street. Okay.
Also, it's gonna smell a lot worse in the summer,
right,
than it does
right.
in the winter.
So it's going to ruin the street, right? It's going to ruin the appearance of the street, right? So in the summer it's forbidden, but b'mos hageshamim yesh lahem rishus. In the winter months, where the street is a mess anyhow, and it's all muddy and dug up, so then I'm allowed to. I'm not doing significant damage to the street by washing out my yard, so then it's permitted. Okay. However, afal pi sheberishus, even though I have permission to do so by Bezdin, im hiziku chayavim l'shalem. If damage was done by me washing out my yard, right, and now somebody else slipped in the puddle of water that I left there in the street, so then I'm responsible for the damage. Okay?
Lucky if it's only water.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so if it did damage, exactly. So if it did damage, then I'm responsible. Says the Gemara, Heichidam. So what's the case of the damage that was done? Ella basa denayich. So says the Gemara, if I created a stream of water, okay, okay, if I created a stream of water, let's say I'm washing out I'm washing out my yard, right, and I'm using my pressure washer, and there's a big stream of water coming down, right, and it washes away my friend's car, right, and his whole car goes flying down the street and gets damaged. Okay, so if it's a direct consequence of my actions, okay, so then, right, it goes into his yard and it ruins his beautiful yard and his flowers. The stream of water goes through and it washes everything away. So if it's a direct consequence of my actions, kochu, okay, that is called kocho. That's my actions, my strength, meaning, and that's included, Rashi says, in adam hamazik, right? It's as if I took the pressure washer myself and I went into his yard, right, and I uprooted all his plants and his flowers, right. So if I did that, right, let's say I took the pressure washer, I went into his yard and I uprooted his plants there, right. So everybody understands that that's an example of adam hamazik. That's a person who's doing damage directly, right. The fact that I'm using a tool, right, doesn't exempt me from being liable for my actions, right. So here, the fact that I'm using the tool in my own property, okay, but if I'm generating a force which is directly causing damage, then that's considered adam hamazik. That's considered me doing the damage, and that's an explicit case in the Mishnah itself. Okay? That's an explicit case in the Mishnah, so I don't need Rav Ada bar Ahava to add this case on. Right, that case is clear in the Mishnah itself. Ella basa denaychi. So rather, it must mean that it's talking about I created a puddle of water in the street. It's no longer in movement. It's just it's a stationary puddle. It's stagnant there, and then somebody else comes and trips in it, right, and slips in that puddle and falls down and gets hurt. Right. So it's not talking about a direct consequence of my actions, meaning it's not in the force that I'm creating. Okay. Meaning I created this puddle. 2 hours later, after the puddle is sitting there, right, somebody comes and slips in it. Right, so you can't call that adam hamazik. That's not me doing the damage directly, right? Because my force is long ended, right? Rather, it's a case of what would that be most comparable to? To a pit, to bore. So says the Gemara, right? Ala basa denaychi hechidami. What's the case? Ida afkirinu, if he had given up ownership of it, bein the rab, bein the shmuel hainu bor, then that's a case of bor. If Just as a bor has no place in the Rishus Harabim except to do damage, so to here, this puddle of water has no place other than to do damage. And it's your property. So you'll tell me it's when I did not give up ownership of it. Nevertheless, according to Shmuel, it says everything is learned out from bor. This too would be bor. Says the Gemara, no, there's a distinction. I was mafkir for lodami lebor, but it's not exactly comparable to bor. This is the major distinction. Malabor shekin shelo b'rishus. Okay, for a bor digging a pit in the Rishus Harabim, I have no permission to do so. Right, it's illegal for me to do so, to go and dig a pit. If I did it, of course, I'm responsible for the damage that was done because I had no right to do so to begin with. Tamar bahani de b'rishus. Right, but here, right, Bezdin gave me permission to wash out my yard. Right. So do I know automatically that I'd be responsible for the damage that was later caused when I did so with Bezdin's permission? Not so simple. Okay. So the fact that the Mishnah gives me a case of bor would not immediately tell me that I'd be responsible for this case of washing out my yard as well, because here I had permission to do so. Right. Says the Gemara going on to 6b, going to Vav Amud Beis, the 6b at the top. Shor yochiach. Okay. Sure is a good proof, though. Okay. Why? Do I have the right to own an animal? Of course, I have the right to own an animal, right? Going on to 6b. Yeah. Right. So do I have the right to own an animal? Right. Of course, I have the right to own an animal. Does the fact that I have the right to own an animal exempt me from the damage that the animal did? No. So you see that just because I had permission to do something doesn't exempt me from the damage caused. Okay. So shor yochiach. Says the Gemara, no, malashosh can darko lele cholahazik. Right now, sure, it's an expectation, right, that your animal is going to move around and do damage. That's what animals do, right? They move around and they cause, they wreak havoc, right? So there, it's an expectation that I'm liable for the damage that occurred, right? But in this case, where it's a stationary puddle, right? So maybe I would think that here I'm not responsible for the damage that occurred. So what's going to happen? Again, says the Gemara, bor tochiach. So bor is going to teach me that I'm liable even for a stationary puddle, even for something that doesn't go out and do damage. Chazar adin. Okay, so here as well, we're going to end up in the same place. Chazar adin. We go in a circle again. What we mean to say by chazar adin is that from each one by itself, from bor by itself, I wouldn't be able to learn out. Right, because here I have permission, but the boy didn't have permission. Right, from shore I wouldn't be able to learn out by itself, even though shore you have permission, you're permitted to own an animal, and you're liable anyhow. But that's where there's a direct expectation that the animal's going to go ahead and do damage. Right, but here there's not such an expectation, so I wouldn't know. But from the combination of the two, I could learn out. Okay, so from the combination of the two, I am going to learn out, and therefore, according to again, was this? Avada Barahava. Yeah, from Avada Barahava, the Mishnah is coming to include the case of somebody who's washing out their yard, and then the water does damage in the Rishus Harabim. Okay. Ravina Amar. Ravina gives me another case. Amar La'asuye Hadetran. It's coming to include this that we learned in the Mishnah. Hakosel v'ha'ilan shenaflu l'Rishus Harabim v'hiziku poter milashalet. So if a person has a tree or a wall that collapses, okay, the tree falls down, the wall collapses into the Rishus Harabim, and it does damage. Okay, so my tree falls down on someone's parked car. Okay, poter milashalet. So I'm poter from pay, right? Because I'm considered an onus, right? It's not something that we're talking about a case where it was not expected. I had no reason to expect such a thing to happen. I didn't chop down the tree. The wall, as we'll see, right. Initially, we're talking about a wall that's in good condition. No reason to expect such a thing to occur. So it's an onus, right? It's not something that I'm responsible for. Okay. However, nasnu lo zman, exactly like Eric's point, nasnu lo zman lakutz eso ilam v'listos hakosel. So let's say Bezdin sent out an arborist, right, and they said your tree is diseased, right, and it's dying, right. You have a month to cut down your tree, okay, or your wall is weak, right? And you have a month to take down this wall. So then it depends. If it falls down within that month, okay, so Bestin gave you a month to cut it down, right? And during that month it fell down, so then you're still potter, okay, because you're operating under the within the confines of what Bestin told you to do, right? So then you're still going to be potter. Bestin said you have a month to do so, right? 2 days later it falls down. Okay, Bestin gave me a month, so I'm still right. I'm still okay. But if the month passed, right, so then chayiv, then certainly you're liable, okay, because you were in violation. Besdin told you to take it down, you didn't. You're negligent, so then you're liable. Okay, says the Gemara, Hechidami. What's the case? Ida afkara, if you were mafkirit, right, you gave up your ownership of it. Okay, so yeah, Ida afkara bein l'Rav bein l'Shmuel hainu bor. Okay. So then, both according to Rav and Shmuel, this would be a case of bor. Okay, so says the Gemara, "Maishna bor the hezeko matzoi ushmiraso alecha." Just like by a bor, it's very likely for it to cause damage, and it's your responsibility to watch over it. Haninami here as well, hezekon matzoi ushmiraso alecha. Right, the damage is very common, and it's your obligation to watch it. Right. And let's say you'll tell me it was not mafkirit. According to Shmuel, it's still learned out from bor. Even though by bor you give up ownership, here it's still learned out from bor, even though you didn't give up ownership. Says the Gemara, no, you're right. We're talking about a case where he did give up ownership. But it's not immediately comparable to bor. Why? A bor, from its very onset, right, from the creation, from the moment that I dug the pit, right, its only purpose is to do damage, right? It's an illegal pit, right? It was never supposed to be there, right? As soon as I put it there, it's already something which is liable to do damage. Okay, so a bor has no right to existence, is what we're saying. Okay, the bor is never supposed to exist. If it exists, it's only to do damage. Okay, but here, this tree, when I first planted it, right, it's in my property. It's a perfectly healthy tree, right? It's a perfectly legal existence, right? This wall, when I first built it, right, as a sturdy wall, as a perfectly legal existence, right? So later it becomes a bor, right? Once it gets weak or the tree dies, then it becomes a bor, right? But it's an initial existence, right? It was perfectly fine. So can I learn that out from bor? That I'm liable? Not necessarily, right? Because bor, I never had a right to create it to begin with. Here, I had a right to create it. So, do I know automatically that I'd be liable in this case? No, it's not immediately comparable to bor. It's not an exact comparison. Okay? Says the Gemara, shor yochiach. But shor will teach me, right? By an animal, do I have the right to own the animal? Is it a legal existence? Of course, right? Of course, I'm allowed to own the animal. Does the fact that I'm allowed to own it then exempt me from paying for the damage that it caused? No, right? So that's a proof that even though I have a right to it, doesn't exempt me from the damage. Okay, so therefore, yes, you had a right to plant a tree and you had a right to build a wall, but that doesn't exempt you from the damage that it causes. Okay, says the Gemara, right? Okay, but it's not a direct comparison to shor either, right? Because shor is something that goes out and does damage, right? Here, this is not something that I automatically expect for it to go out and do damage. It's a wall or a tree. It's not something that I expect to do damage. It says Gemara bor tochiach. So therefore, I'm going to learn it out from bor. So here again as well, right? We're saying the same thing, that from bor by itself, I would not be able to learn out. From shor by itself, I would not be able to learn out. So what do? I combine the two, and from the combination of the two, I'm able to learn out that which I would not have been able to learn out from one alone, and therefore it tells me that I'm liable for the dead tree or for the wall that collapsed, right? If I didn't take it down within the time specified by Bezdin, okay, then I'm liable for it, and that's learned out from the combination of bor and shor together. So that's a fourth case that the Mishnah is coming to add when the Mishnah said Atzad Shabash Shabahen. What all of these have in common, right, is coming to include these four extra cases. Okay, so these four cases that the Mishnah is coming to include is a case of a packet, an object that was left on a roof and blew down into the Rishus Harabim, and someone tripped over it. It's including a boar which was kicked around by somebody, right? So somebody kicked it, it ended up in the middle of the street, then I'm liable for that as well. Okay, it's including the case of somebody who's washing out his yard and leaves a puddle in the street that somebody falls into, and it's including a case of someone who did not take down his wall or cut down his tree, and then it collapsed into the Rishus Harabim, and that too is included. So these four cases are included in the Mishnah.
So if he follows the rules of the best,
Right.
that meaning he's relieved of responsibility within the 30 days?
Because he's considered an onus, right?
Okay.
Right. It's not something that he'd be liable for, because he's following Bezdin's instructions. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. All right. Kishahizik chav hamazik. Okay, so continuing the wording of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, and this is just the Gemara makes a very tangential point here, but the Mishnah said, Kishahizik, when they do damage, chav hamazik. Okay, the mazik, the owner of or the person who did the damage, he is obligated to pay. Okay, and normally the word for obligated is chayav. Okay, with a yud. Here we wrote chav in the Mishnah. So it says the Gemara, chav hamazik, chayav hamazik mibayalei. It should have said chayav with the yud. Why does it say chav? Says the Gemara, Amar of Yehuda Amarav, Haitana Yerushalmi, who this Mishnah was authored by a Tana of Eretz Yisrael, of Israeli origins, right, from Yerushalayim. And in Yerushalayim, they used to talk differently. Their syntax was different than those in Bavel, and therefore they said the word chav instead of the word chayev. The Tani Lishna Kalila, they used a tighter sort of syntax and how they spoke. So they would say chav instead of chayav. Okay, so that's why the Mishnah wrote chav instead of chayav. It's of no halachic significance. Okay, all right. L'shalim tashlume nezek. So he has to pay he has to pay reparations for the damage, right? And the Mishnah said b'meitav ha'aretz, in the best of the property. Okay, in the best of the property. Now, what does it mean, the best of the property?
Okay. The good fields.
It says the Gemara. Let's see. Meitav sadehu or meitav karma yishalim. So it's a pasuk. Okay, pasuk says the best of his field, the best of his property, he shall pay. Okay. So the Mishnah, the pasuk is talking about as follows: Ki yava ish sada okerem v'shilach es beiro. So if somebody will burn down a field, right, this fire will spread from his field to his neighbor's field, right, and it will burn ubir b'stei and it burns down his neighbor's field. Meitav sadeu, the best of his property, or meitav karmo yishalim, the best of his vineyard, he shall pay. Okay. Now here we have a problem that we often have in the Torah, which is the Torah uses pronouns. Okay, the best of his field, the best of his vineyard, he shall pay. Okay,
genderism.
Is it the best of the mazik's field, meaning that the one who did the damage, he pays from the best of his property, or do we say he's liable for the best property of the person whom he did damage to? Okay, so the Gemara's question is as follows: Meitav sadeu shel nizik or meitav karmo shel nizik. So it's going to be a machlokas. According to Rabbi Shmuel, okay, and the Gemara is going to explain this further. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, you pay for the damage done to the very best of the niziks, of the one who is the damagee's property. Okay, so I mean you burnt down his field, right? So you pay for the field for the very best of his fields. Okay. Now the Gemara later is going to ask, if that's not the field that you damaged, why would you have to pay for it? Right? The Gemara is going to get to that question. Okay. But right now we're saying that it's referring to the damage done to your neighbor's field. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Lo boha kotzav ala ligvos l'nezakin min ha'idiyos. Okay, Rabbi Akiva says that no, what the pasuk is coming to tell me is that the one who did the damage, the damager, right, he pays from the best of his property. So meaning like this, he owns all sorts of properties, right? Some are very good quality, some are lower quality, right? So he has to pay from the top of his, from the best of the quality of his fields. So that means when when the damagee comes to collect, right, for the damages done to him,
Mhm.
he can collect from the very best of the damager's property. Right? Now, it doesn't mean that he gets paid more or less, right? He's getting paid, let's say, $500 worth of damage,
Mhm.
right? Either way, he's going to get the same $500. Question is, does he get $500 worth of high quality field, or does he get $500 worth of low quality field? He would prefer to get the high quality, so the Torah says he gets the high quality. Okay, so it's not a change in value, right?
Oh, that's
It's a change in quality. Right? But Kalvachoma lahegdish and Kol Shekin, all the more so for hegdish, which we'll leave aside for now. When damage that was done, or perhaps, or a case of hegdish, we'll see later what that case is.
Okay.
Okay. Now asks the Gemara of Rabbi Shmuel, Achal Shmeina Mishalim Shmeina. Now Rabbi Shmuel, which is the question that you had before, right? According to Rabbi Shmuel, what are we trying to say? If I did damage to a shmeina, means fat, a healthy field, right? If I did damage to a prosperous field, okay, so then it makes sense I should have to pay for the equivalent of that, right? So achal shmeina mishalim shmeina, achal k'chusha mishalim shmeina, right? But if I did damage to a field which was in very bad shape, right? So then does it make sense that I would have to pay for top value for the field that I didn't do damage to?
Mhm.
Doesn't make any sense. Okay.
I should make it believe that's sort of a penalty.
Well, yeah, but we can't make you pay. The Torah is not making him pay for more than he actually did damage to.
Okay, so there's no penalty. It's just-
There's no penalties, right? This is actual reparations for the damage done, right? So Amar of Idi Bar Avin, Hachabamayaskinon. So Idi Bar Avin explains, what are we talking about? Kigon she'achal aruga beno arugos, that the fire came and it burnt up one section of the field. Okay. Now it's impossible for us to determine afterwards, right? What section of the field was it? Was it the top quality, right? Or was it the lower quality? Okay. V'lo yadina nikchusha achal ishmeina achal. The mishalim shmeina. Okay. So now after the fire came through, there's nothing left, right? It's just charred remains left. And we don't know, did it eat from the top quality property or did it eat from the lower quality, right? Meaning you have a field, right? And some of it is higher quality and some of it is lower quality. And we don't know which part got burnt.
Why would you not know?
What?
Why would you not?
So meaning, let's say you have top quality and it borders with the lower quality, right?
Okay.
And the fire came through and burnt somewhere around that border, right? And we're not clear, was it on the top, right? And once it's all burnt, there's no way to tell anymore, right? So we don't know what was destroyed. Okay, so maybe the Torah is telling me you err on the side of higher quality. Okay, and we'll assume that it was the high quality. Okay.
Is there a possible concern? I guess you'd call it Talmudic equivalent of insurance fraud or something. I mean, what if
So the
the guy
Gemara
set fire to his own land and he knew it was crud, but he wants
we're talking about a case,
insurance claim, so to speak,
we're talking about a case where we know that the neighbor is liable. Right. We know that he's liable. We know the fire started in his field and it spread to his neighbor's field. So we know that he's liable. But yes, there would have to be proof that he's liable. Right? There would have to be proof that he's liable. He's only liable if there's proof that he is, right? So says the Gemara doesn't accept this point. Why? Okay. Amar Rava questions this. Rava says, "Ma ilu yadina dekhusha achal lo mishalim el khusha hashda lo yadina dekhusha achal ishmeina achal mishalim shmeina amotzi mechavero olav araya." So asks the Gemara, it can't be, and asks Rava, it can't be if you tell me, right, that if I knew for sure that that the fire only destroyed the lower quality, what would I have to pay for it? Lower quality. Right. So now that you're not sure, you can't misafek from a doubt. You can't obligate me to pay the higher quality. Right? What's the general rule that we always have when it comes to monetary decisions? Hamotzi mechavero olav araya. If you want to collect damages from me, you have to prove that I'm liable. Right? If you come into Beis Din and say that I owe you $100, right? What's Beis Din going to say? bring a proof.
Yeah.
Right? They're not going to ask me to prove that I'm innocent. They're going to ask you to prove that I'm liable. Right?
Right.
So here too, if you don't have proof that I destroyed the higher quality,
Mhm.
you can't obligate me to pay that. Right? You can't obligate me to pay. So I don't need the pasuk. So it can't be that the pasuk is telling me that in a case of doubt, right, I'm obligated to pay the higher value, the higher quality. That's not true. That runs contrary to Hamotzi Mechaber Olav Araya, which is the rule we have everywhere in the Torah, that I'm only liable for that which you can prove I'm liable for. Okay? So Elo Omar of Acha Bar Yaakov, Hacha B'Mayaskinon, Pingo Shahoisa, Idias Denizik, Kiziburas Damazik. Okay. So okay, so they let's try and finish this up right here. The case is when the highest value of the best quality field that the nizik owns, that the one who's damaged owns, is only equivalent to the lowest value property of the mazik of the one who did the damage. Okay, meaning they're in different economic strata, and the nizik has much lower quality fields, right? And the best of his is equivalent to the worst of the least valuable of the mazik. Okay, so the question is now, so the mazik did damage to the top quality of the nizik, right? The question is, can he say, look, I damaged your field, which is level C. I'll pay you for my level C. Right? And don't complain. This is as good as you got. Right? This is what you had. That's what I'm going to give you. Right? Or do we say no? If you're a mazik, you always have to pay from level A. You have to pay from the best. Okay? So that's the machlokes. Okay? Rabbi Shmuel says, no, we go based on the property that was damaged. So if you damage level C, you only have to pay from your level C, even though you have better property available. Rabbi Akiva says, no, the pasuk is coming to teach me that you have to pay from the best of your quality, right? The best of your fields, right? Even though it's better than what you did damage to. Right? Even though you did damage to level C, you're going to have to pay